It's 1846. Paris is buzzing with revolution, romance, and really bad smelling streets. A Belgian instrument maker named Adolphe Sax stands before the French Academy of Sciences, clutching what looks like a confused plumbing experiment crossed with a brass instrument gone terribly, wonderfully wrong. He's about to demonstrate his latest invention, a wooden instrument with brass keys, a conical body, and a sound so wild that half the room think he's cursed, and the other half thinks they've died and gone to musical heaven. That invention, of course, is the saxophone. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about it, what it is, where it came from, and why it sounds like liquid seduction wrapped in brass, and why, despite being invented almost 180 years ago, it still makes people feel things that no other instrument can. But first, please hit that subscribe button. Not because I need the validation, okay, maybe a little, but because there's a whole channel here full of what is videos just like this one. I'm building something really cool here, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Now let's talk about saxophones. 1. Definition and what it actually is. Let's start with the obvious question. What exactly is a saxophone? At its most basic, a saxophone is a single reed woodwind instrument with a conical body made of brass. Now I know what you're thinking. Single reed, woodwind, brass, make up your mind. And honestly, the saxophone is equally confused about its own identity. It's a musical equivalent of that one friend who shows up to a black tie event in a tuxedo t-shirt, just absolutely refusing to be categorized. The single reed part comes from the mouthpiece, which is made of plastic or rubber. It has a thin piece of cane clamped against it. When you blow air across that reed, it vibrates, and those vibrations travel through the instrument's body, getting amplified and enriched as they go. The conical shape, meaning it gets wider as it goes down, gives the saxophone its distinctly warm, full-bodied sound. Unlike its straight-laced cousin, the clarinet, which is a cylindrical bore and somewhat reedier, buzzier tone, the saxophone swoops and curves both visually and sonically. And yes, even though it's made of brass and you have to polish it to keep it from looking like a lost artifact from a pirate ship, it's classified as a woodwind instrument because of how the sound is produced. The material doesn't determine the category, the method does. So congratulations, saxophone, you've been officially inducted into the woodwind family, despite looking like you should be in the marching band's brass section. There are several types of saxophone, ranging from the soprano, small, bright, and hilariously difficult to play in tune, to the massive contrabass, so large it requires its own zip code and a commitment to either serious physical fitness or really good seed. The most common ones you'll encounter are the alto saxophone, which is smaller and higher pitched, and the tenor saxophone, which is larger and gives you that big, rich, I'm about to play a solo in a jazz club sound. So in summary, brass body, woodwind soul, single reed, conical shape, and the ability to make people feel things. That's the saxophone. 2. Origins, the Belgian visionary. Now let's travel back to the 1840s, when a man named Adolphe Sax decided that the world needed something it didn't know it wanted. Adolphe Sax was born in 1814 in Dinant, Belgium. Though if you ask the French, they'd say he was clearly French because, well, everything interesting comes from France, right? Sax showed musical talent early, training as both a performer and an instrument maker. He was particularly skilled at playing the flute and the clarinet, but noticed something during his years of performing. There was a gap in the musical landscape. The woodwinds had their sweet, sensitive sounds, and the brasses had their bold, powerful projections, but nobody was bridging that gap. There was no instrument that could sing with the tenderness of a woodwind and project with the power of a brass. Sax had a vision. What if you took the clarinet's single reed mouthpiece, the part that made those reedy, expressive sounds, and combined it with the brass's body projection and power? What if you shaped that body into a cone instead of a cylinder, allowing the sound to swell and fill a space? He started working on his invention in the early 1840s, and by 1846 he had something ready to show the world. He patented the saxophone later that year, securing exclusive rights to manufacture it in France. The patent covered a family of instruments, from the highest soprano down to the powerful contrabass. But here's where things get interesting, and by interesting I mean dramatically French. The Parisian musical establishment was not thrilled. Composers like Hector Berlioz, who had initially been supportive, later turned on Sax. There were lawsuits, there were accusations of fraud, there were rival instrument makers spreading rumors that Sax's invention was structurally unsound and likely to explode during a performance. One competitor even tried to argue that saxophone was too similar to his own instrument's name and should be disallowed. Sax faced financial ruin, depression, and more than one attempt on his life. He was once attacked by a gang of disgruntled instrument makers who left him for dead in a Parisian gutter. He recovered, rebuilt his business, and eventually won over the establishment. But it took decades. In 1857, Sax achieved a major victory when the Paris Conservatory added the saxophone to its curriculum, though only as an optional subject, which is the academic equivalent of "we're not mad, we're just disappointed." Nevertheless, this legitimized the instrument and helped establish it as a serious musical tool rather than a curiosity. So the next time you hear a smooth sax solo in a jazz club, remember that you're hearing the dream of a Belgian inventor who fought lawsuits, assassination attempts, and the entire French musical establishment to give the world an instrument that refused to be pinned down. 3. Development and evolution. The saxophone didn't just appear fully formed, like Athena from the head of Zeus. It evolved, mutated, and improved over the decades, thanks to generations of craftsmen, players, and tinkerers, who looked at Sax's original design and said, yeah, but what if we added more keys? Early saxophones were primitive by modern standards. They had fewer keys, which meant more cross-fingerings and awkward contortions for players trying to hit certain notes. The keywork was often poorly designed, leading to mechanical breakdowns and intonation issues that made the saxophones the butt of orchestra jokes for years. Yes, very amusing, said every sax player ever. Laugh it up while we invent jazz and change music forever. The big turning point came in the early 20th century, when instrument makers started applying modern manufacturing techniques and ergonomic design to the saxophone. Companies like Selmer in France, Kohn and Bucher in America, and later Yamaha in Japan, began producing saxophones with better keywork, more precise intonation, and improved metalwork that could withstand the demands of professional use. The modern saxophone you see today, whether it's a gleaming gold brass alto or an imposing nickel-plated tenor, is the result of about 150 years of incremental improvements. We've added keys for almost every conceivable fingering, improved the mechanism so that fingers barely have to move, and refined the bore and body shapes to produce a more consistent, controllable sound. One major development was the standardization of the instrument's range and key system. While there are still some variations, particularly in the soprano saxophone, which has a tendency to go rogue and play whatever pitch it feels like on any given day, most modern saxophones share the same fingering system. This means that a sax player who's learned to play on an alto can pick up a tenor and have a reasonably good idea of what's going on, even if their lips are doing overtime. The materials have also evolved. Early saxophones were often made of brass, with various plating options: gold lacquer, silver plate, nickel plate. Today you can find saxophones made of bronze, copper, and even precious metals for those players who want their instrument to double as a retirement fund. The mouthpiece has also seen tremendous development, with modern materials and designs allowing for unprecedented control over tone and response. But perhaps the most significant development wasn't the instrument itself, but how people learned to play it. The saxophone finally got its full academic due in the 20th century, with conservatories and jazz programs around the world developing standardized methods and pedagogies. You can now get a master's degree in saxophone performance, which means that somewhere out there, someone wrote a dissertation about altissimo fingering, and we should all be grateful for that service. 4. Methods of play, making those sexy sounds. Now we come to the part that confuses everyone who's never played a saxophone. How exactly does this thing work? Let me walk you through it from the moment you pick up the instrument to the moment you make your first beautiful or horrifying sound. First, you hold the saxophone. The left hand goes on the upper stack of keys, the ones near the mouthpiece, while the right hand handles the lower stack and the octave key. The thumb of your right hand supports the instrument's weight, and your left thumb anchors near the top. If you're standing, you might use a neck strap to take some of the weight off your hands and neck. If you've ever seen a sax player with a strap mark on the neck, this is why. The saxophone is deceptively heavy for its size, like a small golden retriever that happens to be made of brass. Now the mouthpiece. This is where the magic happens. The mouthpiece has a thin piece of reed, usually made of cane, clamped against it with a ligature. The reed is the thing that actually vibrates and produces the sound. Beginners often start with softer reeds, which are easier to play but give less control, and gradually work up to harder reeds as their embouchure, those are your facial muscles for the uninitiated, develops. Speaking of embouchure, that's your mouth's job in this whole operation. You shape your lips and facial muscles around the mouthpiece in a way that creates a seal while allowing the reed to vibrate freely. It's a delicate balance. Too tight and you choke off the sound. Too loose and you get this awful squawking noise that sounds like a goose being told bad news. Experienced players develop surprisingly strong facial muscles from this, which is why sax players often look like they're constantly chewing something, and why they age remarkably well in the jawline department. Once you've got your embouchure sorted, you blow air, but not just any air. It has to be focused, steady, and directed specifically at the reed to set it vibrating. Beginners are often told to imagine they're trying to make the reed sing, which sounds poetic until you're standing there blowing aggressively at a piece of cane while your dog watches with visible concern. The air travels through the instrument's body, and here the saxophone's conical shape does its thing. Unlike a cylindrical instrument like a clarinet, where the air column vibrates in a relatively straightforward way, the saxophone's expanding bore allows for more complex harmonics and gives that rich, complex sound we associate with the instrument. Meanwhile, your fingers are doing a complicated dance across the keys. Each key covers a tone hole, and by opening and closing various combinations of keys, you change the effective length of the air column inside the instrument, which changes the pitch. The saxophone uses a sophisticated system of keywork that can seem overwhelming at first. All those keys and palm keys and octave keys and side keys. But experienced players develop a kind of muscle memory that lets them move without thinking. And then there's the octave key. The saxophone is a transposing instrument, which means that when you cover all the tone holes, you don't get the same pitch as a piano's middle C. Instead, you get a B flat, which is why the saxophone can read music in concert pitch while sounding different. The octave key engages additional vents that change which harmonics you get, effectively jumping you up to a higher register. This is also why learning the saxophone requires learning two different sets of fingerings for the same note depending on which octave you want. Not because the universe hates you, but because that's how the instrument's acoustics work. Mastering all of this takes years. The great saxophonists make it look effortless because they've logged thousands of hours in practice rooms, developing the breath control, finger agility, and embouchure strength that allows them to produce those liquid, effortless sounding lines. It's a physical discipline as much as a musical one, which is why professional sax players can usually hold their breath for an absurdly long time, and why they often look like they're about to pop a blood vessel during a really sustained high note. 5. Notable works and players. The saxophone would be nothing without the artists who transformed it from a curiosity into an icon. Let's talk about the legends who showed the world what this instrument could do. First, we have to talk about jazz, because let's be honest, the saxophone and jazz have been in a committed relationship since approximately 1920, and nobody's getting a divorce. Charlie Parker, nicknamed Bird, was the architect of bebop. He played the alto saxophone like it had never been played before. In the 1940s, Parker and his contemporaries revolutionized jazz by playing at speeds and complexities that left older musicians scratching their heads. His solo on Coco from the famous 1945 jam session is still studied in music schools today, not because it's a good starting point for beginners, but because it's a masterclass in harmonic improvisation that even the best players struggle to replicate. Parker had a famously troubled life, drug addiction, mental health struggles, and an early death at just 34. But his musical innovations changed jazz forever, and the saxophone became the voice of that revolution. John Coltrane took the tenor saxophone into territories that hadn't been explored yet. His album, A Love Supreme from 1964, is one of the most influential recordings in jazz history, a spiritual journey compressed into 33 minutes of transcendent music. Coltrane's later works, particularly albums like Ascension and Meditations, pushed the boundaries of what jazz could be, using the saxophone as a vessel for something that approached pure expression. When Coltrane died at only 40 years old, he left behind a body of work that continues to influence musicians across every genre. On the alto side, we have Cannonball Adderley, whose warm, accessible playing brought jazz to wider audiences, and Ornette Coleman, who completely broke the rules with his free jazz approach, playing without chordal accompaniment and encouraging his saxophones to wail, squeak, and sing in ways that had audiences either raving or walking out. But jazz isn't the only game in town. Classical composers eventually came round to the saxophone, though they were fashionably late to the party. Maurice Ravel wrote a piece called Bolero that features a famous saxophone part. Yes, that melody you've heard in every movie and commercial since the dawn of time is played on saxophone. Alexander Glazunov wrote the first concerto for the instrument, and contemporary composers continue to find new uses for its unique voice. In the R&B and funk world, the saxophone became essential to the horn sections that drove dance floors wild from 1960s through to the 1990s. Players like Maceo Parker, who spent decades with James Brown and later led his own bands, proved that the saxophone could be as funky as any guitar or drum kit. His riffs on tracks like Get Up, I Feel Like Being a Sex Machine are embedded into the DNA of popular music. And we can't talk about saxophonists without mentioning one of the most influential figures in the instrument's history, Lisa Simpson. No, wait a minute, that's wrong. Let me think. The most important saxophonist for the younger generation might be... Actually, you know what? Just go watch the film Whiplash. While it's not specifically about saxophones, it does capture the intensity that dedicated musicians bring to their craft. And for the record, the actual saxophonist to know in modern music is Kamasi Washington, whose triple album Epic brought jazz back to the pop culture conversation in a big way in 2015. 6. Place in pop culture. The saxophone has a relationship with popular culture that goes far beyond the concert hall and the jazz club. It has become a symbol, a cultural touchstone, and in the hands of the right filmmakers and advertisers, an instantly recognizable shorthand for certain moods and ideas. Think about the sex saxophone trope. Yes, it's an actual thing. The saxophone has developed a reputation for being, well, sexy. There's something about the warm, breathy tone that suggests intimacy, late nights, and perhaps poor decision making. This association started in jazz clubs of the 1920s and 30s, when the saxophone was the instrument of choice for musicians playing to audiences looking for excitement. By the 1950s and 60s, it was cemented in pop culture consciousness. Movies have leaned into this hard. In Play Misty for Me, Clint Eastwood plays a radio DJ who becomes obsessed with a fan played by Jessica Walter, and the saxophone, performed by the legendary Tom Scott, provides the movie's haunting, unsettling soundtrack. The instrument becomes associated with obsession and danger, which is quite a leap from its romantic connotations. In The Big Lebowski, the dude's arch nemesis is a former child actor turned jazz enthusiast who plays an aggressively avant-garde saxophone, and the film uses this to signal his pretentiousness and menace. Television has also gotten in on the act. The opening theme of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, one of the most iconic TV theme songs ever, features a saxophone solo that's instantly recognizable to anyone who grew up in the 90s. The sax became the sound of a certain kind of cool, youthful energy, and that association has persisted. Advertisers have long used the saxophone to signal a particular vibe. Luxury products, alcoholic beverages, and anything targeting an adult audience frequently feature saxophone music in their commercials, presumably because it suggests sophistication and, yes, sex appeal. You'll hear it in ads for everything from watches to whiskey, and the message is always the same. This product is for someone with refined taste and probably a leather jacket. The 1980s were a particularly interesting time for the saxophone in pop music. While jazz was struggling in the mainstream, the instrument found new life in rock, pop, and especially smooth jazz. Kenny G became one of the best-selling music artists of all time, and whether you love him or find him elevator music adjacent, there's no denying his impact. His song Songbird became one of the most recognized saxophone melodies in history, and still shows up at weddings, proms, and every romantic montage in every movie and TV show made in the last 40 years. More recently, the saxophone has experienced a kind of ironic revival. In the TV show Stranger Things, the character Robin Buckley, played by Maya Hawke, mentions being in the band, and the show uses saxophone music to signal its 1980s setting. In the world of viral videos, there are entire accounts dedicated to saxophone covers of pop songs, and the juxtaposition of the instrument's smooth tone with modern hip-hop creates something genuinely new and entertaining. The saxophone has also become something of a meme, with the sexy sax man phenomenon. Street performers playing unexpected saxophone in public spaces, often with elaborate choreography. These videos rack up millions of views on YouTube, proof that the instrument still captures people's imaginations in ways that most other instruments can only dream about. So there you have it, the saxophone in all its glory. We talked about its origins in the mind of a Belgian inventor who fought the French establishment. We explored its development from a quirky curiosity to a refined modern instrument. We broke down the surprisingly complex mechanics of how you actually produce sound from the thing. We celebrated the legends who transformed it from a supporting instrument into the lead voice that could speak directly into the soul. And we examined how it became one of the most recognizable, most culturally loaded instruments in human history. The saxophone is many things. It's a woodwind that looks like brass. It's an instrument that bridges classical music and jazz, sophistication and sensuality, the concert hall and the subway station. It's something that a beginner can make terrible noise on within 5 minutes, and a lifetime master can still discover new possibilities in. It's a piece of engineering, an artistic tool, and, some would argue, a lifestyle. Next time you hear that distinctive sound in a song, in a movie, or coming from a street performer who definitely has a permit for that, you'll have a whole new appreciation for what's happening. You'll know about Adolphe Sax and his impossible dream. You'll understand the decades of development that turned a patent into a perfected instrument. And you'll recognize that you're not just hearing notes, you're hearing almost 200 years of history poured into a single, glorious, undeniably sexy sound. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the saxophone, you're going to love the rest of the What Is channel. I've got videos about all kinds of fascinating topics, instruments, history, science, culture, you name it. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join us for more journeys into the things that make our world interesting. And if you want to suggest a topic for a future video, drop it in the comments. We read them all, even the weird ones, especially the weird ones. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep wondering, and keep listening. See you next time.